on everybody's lips is Robert Williams, and how surprisingly good he's been. And I wonder if there is a realistic path to him ever cracking the rotation. It's so hard. He's playing very well, but it's also so hard for me to see, given the amount and quality of big guys that are ahead of him, and Stevens' propensity to not even play bigs.
Well, I mean, they're going small more often. They almost have to because of their roster, right? They're starting small. They got Terry Rozier and Marcus Smart, who are probably their two best bench players coming off the bench. So yeah, I've wondered this myself. Of how small are the Celtics going to go? Is that going to hurt their defense? How is Robert Williams going to fit in here? Because he clearly has a lot of potential. These are difficult questions. Jared, where do you think Brad Stevens will go with this?
I mean, just right now, it doesn't seem like there's a real need for him. And it depends on, obviously, health. But just with everybody healthy, Baines fills the role that he would fill fairly nicely. And I think Tice would get the minutes over him just because Tice is so much more reliable and consistent defense. Williams is way more potent than Tice is. Just like that first play that they ran in the fourth quarter, they just ran like a high pick and roll between him and Wanamaker, and he got like a pretty decent roll. They fed it to him early. He just like caught the ball, turned, and just flew over everybody to throw it down. And he's the only one on the roster that can do that, although Horford can do that sometimes. So in, I'd say, certain situations, especially against teams that are kind of small, it might make sense to go with that just because he's agile enough with his footwork on the perimeter that he can definitely keep up with a smaller team and then really dominate with his reach. But it has to usually be against probably a deeper reserve lineup where they're not as crafty and as skilled offensively, because he looks like solid right now in the preseason, usually going up against second and third units. But like the jump in quality of play from the preseason to the regular season is going to be pretty stark, and he's probably going to get spun around or commit fouls pretty frequently against guys that aren't just going to like dribble into his zone and get swallowed up by him, but guys that are going to muscle him around, guys that are big enough and athletic enough that they can actually shoot over and around him. So right now, I think just the competition he's facing is a little bit easier than usual, and he's not going to look quite the same when they start out, and he's going to also he's not going to get as much of a leash during the regular season as he does during the preseason to make defensive errors. And we know he's going to be making defensive errors once he's out on the perimeter switching, or he's off the ball and they're setting screens on him from behind and he gets lost. I mean, stuff like that's going to start to happen, and he's going to start making errors, and Stevens is probably going to pull him pretty quickly unless Stevens has changed his style compared to Yabu and Jalen and the rookies from the past few years. So, Robert's going to screw up a lot more. People are going to probably say, oh, we overshot it too much. And then 4 months from now, he's going to be the best player in the NBA. And then people are going to go like, oh, you know what, we overreacted again. That's how it always goes with these things.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, people also have to understand that defense for a center is like literally like the quarterback role of a, it's the hardest position on the floor to play when you're on the, the defensive end. And I think that what's been really impressive to me as far as, Robert Williams is I've been really impressed with sort of the polish to his offensive game. And not necessarily, things like shooting and dribbling, but traditional big man stuff. Like screens have not been terrible. We see a lot of these young big guys come in and they're setting screens too early or too late, and they haven't been perfect, but they've been better than, I think kind of Robert Williams himself was budgeted. And while we haven't seen a lot of his passes convert into actual field goals, you can definitely see the passing vision. And it's pretty impressive for, a guy of his size who can, sort of see over the top of defense, and, just to have another guy who can pass like that. It just certainly makes me feel a lot better about his upside than maybe, I'm feeling a lot more optimistic than maybe I might have during, let's say Summer League when he went down immediately, or just, sort of reading some of the, just sort of watching him at Texas A&M and some of that stuff. So I think that there is, while I do agree, I don't think he's going to be cracking the rotation anymore. I certainly think that there's reason to believe he could be like definitely be playing rotation minutes for the Celtics, by his second, third, fourth year in the league.
Well, his awareness is definitely on both ends is probably better than advertised. But how aware are you guys? Do you know about the Boston Barber and Tattoo Company?
Oh, nice.
He's become home to A-list Boston celebrities like Gordon Hayward and Aaron Baines. It's more than just Boston's
A-list.
A-list right there.
A-list. Uh-huh.
It is A-list.
It's A-list that contains well-known Boston celebrities, Gordon Hayward, Evan Valenti,
Mm.
hundreds of thousands of
Number
people
one.
that visit the North End throughout the year are customers there. It's located at 113 Salem Street. Go to Boston Barber and Tattoo, a North End landmark that represents the cultural epicenter of the area at its core. All right, Matt Ignal, Sam Sheehan, Jared Weiss. We're talking Robert Williams now. I've been impressed. Like sometimes you kind of expect Big in his first minutes to come in and look totally lost. That hasn't been the case. I think his feel for the game, it's fairly impressive, even though it's against weaker competition. And I think with the upside that he has, I'd like to see him not just be up in Maine the entire year. I think he could get some real valuable reps being down in Boston's system. And I think he might deserve minutes if he can, do what he did against Malik Monk the other night. I want to keep him close. What say you, Jared?
Yeah, I think he's going to do better than Yabu did in his first season because I think his footwork's already better and he glides more naturally across the court. So his ability to cover space is a lot better. And he seems to have more of a natural read for the movement on the floor. His big problem is just, while he glides very naturally, I'd say gliding is probably the best way to describe his game in its entirety. So he's late on defensive rotations a lot of the time, or players are moving at him too fast, and he's not reacting to that, so he's committing fouls. Like he had 2 fouls in a row early in the fourth quarter in that Cleveland game where guys were just coming at him, and he just wasn't. I think like the first one he was late to rotate over, and the second one is he was trying to take on dribble penetration and transition, and he was up high. The guy was coming at him too fast and trying to get around him. Instead of trying to backpedal and keep his space and then use his reach in his jumping ability to make the play, he just kind of went straight up and reached down and caused a foul. So, Robert's going to foul out pretty quickly, I think, in a lot of games early on, which Yabu had that same issue too. But you know what? He's grown so much just since that very brief summer league stint. I mean, he was kind of all over the place in summer league. Wasn't really engaging physically. Kind of looked pretty lost. His technique's gotten a lot better on his screens. A big thing was screening angles in that first game, where he literally was setting the screens in a way that didn't actually stop the defender, and it was completely ineffective. And I think he's gotten a lot better at that so far. And as a rookie, I mean, so much of his offensive game is just screening and diving or screening and popping. Like that's the most of what he's going to do. I think that's the most of what he's capable of doing, aside from the occasional post up when he has a mismatch. So, he's definitely getting better. And I think over the first month or so, he'll probably be getting a lot of action in Maine, where he's able to play really frequently and just get more reps on that. But it should earn him some playing time later in the season.
Sam Sheehan, who else has stood out for you on these Celtics 2-3 games?
I think that, like Jared had said earlier, I think this is more of a testament to, playing against the 15th men, the two-way contract guys, the training camp guys at the end of the games. But, I think Gershon has, really been like kind of an impact player, especially versus where he was at the end of the year, kind of very quietly. One of the, stories I think for this offseason is, whether or not the Celtics will, decide to exercise Yabu's option or they have a team option for him for next year and then again for the year after. So, and they have a decision coming up on that. I'm pretty sure end of October, something like that. And, he makes a pretty substantial amount of money. People forget he was a 16th, overall pick. The Celtics are going to be in a place next year where they're going to be paying a lot of, luxury tax and stuff like that. And it's, you kind of wonder, is it better to have Yabu, kind of on the roster at $3 million when you could get, a lot of these, NBA minimum style guys who might be able to, help you more now that you're a team in contention. The Celtics have very firmly transitioned out of the, rebuilding stage, and there's a strong likelihood, not a strong likelihood, but there's a possibility the Celtics could have 3 first-round picks in the first 15 picks of next offseason, and suddenly you might not have the room to develop Yabu, the way you did. You already don't have the minutes. Celtics already have rotation guys like Terry Rozier and Marcus Morris who are going to chafe if they don't get minutes. Both of those guys in contract years. So he has a pretty tenuous situation. I didn't expect, I thought maybe his fate might have low key been sort of sealed coming into this year, but he's shown enough for me to where I'm not sure where I would go if I were the team on that decision. Personally, as a fan, I love Yabu, and the content wise, he's worth $3 million to me. Like, let's be real about that. But I think he's done a much better job. He's shown awareness given in a limited role against these, end of the bench guys, and I think he's playing more like a big versus just sort of a bowling ball full of energy, just sort of overpowering people. And I think that he's making more impact plays, at least that jump off the screen rather than sort of floating in and out of games the way he has in his first 2 years.
Another guy who the Celtics have a decision on is Terry Rozier, who's coming up onto restricted free agency. I'm impressed by how he just kind of like looks physically. It looks like he's just in really good shape. I mean, we all know it's a contract year for him, and he's in line for the big bucks. I'm afraid this might be an easy decision for the Celtics come summertime, and just that he's probably priced himself out of where the Celtics might be willing to match. What are your indications, Jared, thus far? As far as where Terry Rozier's free agency might go?
I mean, I don't think much has changed in the preseason because we expected him to be a little bit better handling the ball. We expected him to do pretty much all the stuff that he was doing in the playoffs last year. It looks like he's just continued to evolve gradually as a player to where he left off, and he left off on a pretty good note, except for the terrible shooting in the Game 7 last year. So it looks like this is the guy, or he is the high level projection that we thought he was going to be. So yeah, he's pricing himself towards $20 million a year. And I mean, it kind of depends on whether it's a long-term deal or not, because you're seeing like teams are willing to fork out a lot of money to fill their cap space on short-term deals, or at least they were this offseason. I don't know if it's going to happen next offseason, because a lot of the reason teams did it this offseason was to keep their books clean for next offseason. I don't know how it's going to play out necessarily, but I don't know if the question for the Celtics is as much about price as it is about fit. And I feel like we talked about this 100 times. There's been thousands of non-answers from Terry, from ownership, from management about the pricing and about the bench roll, basically. But it's just like straight up, if you're Terry Rozier and you're someone that has a massive ego in both, and I mean that as a compliment, like, or just a ton of self-confidence, and you're building a great brand, how much does being one of the building blocks of the franchise mean to you, as opposed to being the sixth man who may or may not finish the game on a potentially massive dynasty? And it's not like it's not like one of these like frequent cases where it's someone like, I don't know, like Goran Dragic, for instance, who was behind Steve Nash on a good competitive team, or a really competitive team. I'm sure it's a better example I can't think of. Or like maybe Reggie Jackson on the Thunder a couple years ago. I mean, this is like the Celtics are clearly positioned to be in the finals for a long time right now. So maybe it is kind of similar to the Thunder. And Terry already was becoming a star in his role with the Celtics, knowing that Kyrie was going to be coming back. So like I feel like he's more prepared for that situation than most people would be, but it's like I assume Kyrie is going to stay unless he gets hurt, and then the Celtics don't want to give him a 5-year max. And if he does, it's like Terry doesn't really have a path to getting into the starting lineup unless the Celtics trade 2 of their starters for Anthony Davis. And it's like there's very few scenarios where the Celtics would actually consolidate their starting lineup to acquire a superstar, because there's only like 5 players in the league that are worth trading for them.
Yeah. And kind of on top of all of that too is sort of the question that doesn't really trouble Celtics fans, and I don't think that there's any reason to be super nervous about it. But there is Kyrie Irving's own free agency, and that would were in the very small off chance that Kyrie were to leave, you have the moratorium and all these other times for him to agree to a deal, and then in which case, if the Celtics were actually losing Kyrie Irving, it becomes much more tenable and much more valuable for them to have, match rates on Terry Rozier. And that's, something for Celtics fans to think about, who might say that the Celtics should trade him right now and get something for him versus hanging on to him, they've got to understand that the Celtics are championship contenders right now and need every bit of talent they have if they really want to go toe-to-toe with the Warriors. So having Terry Rozier, for that playoff push is going to be important. And then also on top of that, it also kind of doubles as Kyrie Irving insurance, even though I don't think that that's really something the Celtics totally need to worry about, but it is there.